On today's show, it's time for a very serious debate about Erik Karlsson.
And we take a look at some more depth signings for the organization, but are they finished?
This is Brady Kachuk, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
Your Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You are locked on to the Ottawa Senators, the only daily podcast covering the Sens. On the outskirts of enemy territory, I'm Ross Levitan, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today is Thursday, July 3rd, and Pilsy, we got the terms, we got the deals, and the Senators announcing a couple more signings that we didn't know about yesterday.
Yes, no disrespect to these players. We just didn't get to them. But Wyatt Bongiovanni, Bonjo, coming back to the Belleville Senators.
You play the banjo here. I was doing a violin.
Yeah, definitely the wrong way to do the air instrument there, Ross. The air violin. That's a new one. But I'm glad they brought him back, Ross. I think the chemistry for him and Halliday is very strong. We saw that as soon as both of them were connected in Belleville. So that's a good signing. Seems like he likes it here as well. So good to bring him back. And then Ross, you and I were talking about this. I'm glad they brought Hayden Hodgson's back. You need that type of player in the organization. We did get to see 2 games of him up in the NHL with Ottawa as well, but you need someone that's going to bring some of that physicality and some of that intimidation, and that can be plugged into the lineup at necessary times in the NHL as well. So glad to see Hayden Hodgson's back too.
And Hodgson was a 2-year contract. Everybody else that got deals was a 1-year deal. So I think that's nice. Unfortunately got hurt there because I think he would have played out the string of the regular season with the Ottawa Senators. But he was certainly noticeable in that game against the Habs at 4 hits in a fight in 8 minutes of ice time. Obviously, it's a Belleville signing. And as much as people want to say that intimidation and fighting isn't as much a part of the game, the truth is that's a lie. And especially at the American Hockey League level, where the Ottawa Senators will have a number of their prospects playing next season.
You want to be able
to protect the investments. And Hayden Hodgson, he can play enough that he's not a liability out there. He had 11 points in 43 games, but did suffer an early season injury and was still kind of working his way back in throughout the year. So hopefully health is of the essence for him. He hasn't played 50 games in a season since before COVID when he was in the ECHL. Even still didn't get to that 50 game plateau. Hasn't played 50 in a year since the Saginaw Spirit when he was an alternate captain there in 2016, 2017. But he also had 156 PIMs in those 43 games in Belleville. So an enforcer for down there and does earn himself a 2-year contract. We also yesterday touched on development camp, which continues today in Ottawa, and Jackson Parsons, the reigning CHL goalie of the year, gets an NHL deal. We were wondering if that was going to happen because he was committed to Clarkson University, but he doesn't play hockey to go to school, Pills. He plays hockey to play hockey, and now he's a professional doing it after signing a 3-year entry-level contract, and he's already 20 years old. So it's a bit different than last year where they brought in Michael Simpson on a 1-year AHL deal to get his feet wet, and he ended up splitting time between AHL, ECHL. This is an NHL contract that Jackson Parsons earned, so he's going to be a member of the organization for at least the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, I love it. If you're going to bring in a goalie like that, why not bring in someone that dominated and is probably ready to graduate from the CHL as the CHL goalie of the year? And Kitchener Sens, the Ottawa Senators, are very familiar with that organization. And Ross, we're going to have to get our good friend Sean Fafaro, the host for Rogers TV for the Kitchener Rangers, on to tell us all about how the prospects have done there last year and how Jackson Parsons might fit in with the organization as well. So happy to have him as a hashtag goalie friendly show.
And a local kid too from Embrun, Ontario, which is just southeast of Ottawa. So that's a nice little connection there. And you mentioned Bongiovanni. I mean, talk about the goal scoring of what he can bring. He tied Angus Cruikshank for the team lead in goals, and Bonjo played in 12 less games than Crooker last year too. So you've added now some scoring down in Belleville with Ole Lixell and with Arthur Kaliev, who we discussed yesterday. Both those deals officially announced yesterday.
Also, just quickly, Ross, I think you were thinking of the banjo.
Maybe.
Yeah. I think you got banjo and bongos confused.
Oh
the bongos
my gosh,
are like the
did.
drums, right?
Yeah.
And a banjo is like the guitar-like instrument. So you went 0 for 2 on the air instruments there. Just want to clear that up.
But no,
I
that's
think
a
you
real
mean
drum.
We are professional on this show.
Especially in the summer, where we get into ridiculous debates like we're going to get to next. But I actually have convinced myself that Erik Karlsson needs to be an Ottawa Senator. But we'll wait for that. We'll wait for that because I think it's important to give these guys some shine, because in the third segment, we're then going to look at what's left for the organization to fill needs going into next season. And as much as people want to look at the cap, which Ottawa still has a fair share of going into the season. Now, I, in the GM mode on Puckpedia, have added in the two-way contracts. Of course, those won't count against the cap if they're in the American Hockey League. So that leaves the Senators with a shade over $5 million in cap space. But with the signings of Xavier Bourgault and with the pending signings of Donovan Sabrango and Jan Yannick, with those three guys inked, the Senators still have 6 available contract slots going into next season. That could be 7, depending on if there's a decision on Matthew Andonovski, if they're going to do what they did with Thomas Hamara last year, sending him back to the Ontario Hockey League for his overage season. But let's assume they don't. Let's assume Andonovski stays in the American Hockey League or in the ECHL. That still gives Ottawa a ton of flexibility, and they do have the option to go shopping if they want to continue that. So we'll save that for later on in the show. But how do you feel now? 2 full days, and now we're into the 3rd day of free agency. By the way, Nikolai Ehlers, if you want to make a decision here, TikTok, I'm sure teams are waiting. Clearly, the Winnipeg Jets said enough's enough. He's not coming back here. They pivot and get Gustav Nyquist on a 1-year contract to try to replace that. But how would you grade Steve Staios so far? Let's leave the draft out of it, just what he's done in free agency. So knowing that they had Jordan Spence in the mix and knowing that the prospect pool had added the pieces they did. In terms of the signings that were announced yesterday and Lars Eller on July 1st, how do you think that Steve Staios has fared in his second free agency as GM?
Well, the main points I'll give to Steve Staios is not making any mistakes. And there's big value to that. Ask the Twitter sphere or people in hockey what they think about what the LA Kings did on free agency, turning $25 million of cap space into the players that they signed is interesting. We'll say that. So first off, no mistakes. That's good. I think Ross would probably give him maybe a C. Lars Eller, not a lot of risk there. Just a 1-year deal. Maybe a little more in bonuses than I'd like, but I think you made a good point yesterday. It might have been hard to bring in some of the free agents that we wanted, knowing that they'd be pigeonholed into a 4th-line center role, so you can't do much there. And then I like the depth signings of Lixell. Kaliev, excited for him to come. We knew he was going to be an Ottawa Senator one day. And then Hunter Shepard, not the way I would have gone, but again, other teams...
Winner.
Yep, winner, sure. And other teams had to give out a little bit more money and usually adding the 2nd year on the term to some of the backup options that were available. Or if you're the New Jersey Devils, you hand out a 5-year deal for Jake Allen. So again, no mistakes made there. So I think a C is a good grade.
I'll give him a B- because I think that allowing there to be all these 1-year deals just gives so much flexibility going into next off season. So this season, I think that what the message is with the signings that were made, and we'll see if they add one of those big dogs at any position in the NHL with their remaining cap space. But what this does, and we discussed this before all of the mayhem that happens with the transactions from the draft and free agency, is the onus is now strictly on the core players of this team the Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, Drake Bathersons of the world up front, and even beyond that in the lineup, Dylan Cousins, Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto. They've got a lot of their own developed players that are now firmly in the top 9 up front. Those guys all have to take a step to help this team get further. On the back end, Jake Sanderson, as good as he is, he needs to be an elite number 1 defenseman every night. Not that he has.
From the start of the season, not halfway through.
Exactly. If he can do that, there's a lot of, I think, hope internally that those guys can carry the mail next year. And then depending on how they do, there's that much more flexibility going into the 2026 offseason.
Yeah, and then, Ross, you look at the point that you're going to get full seasons and much more acclimated players in Fabian Zetterlund and Dylan Cousins, and then you add on Jordan Spence as well. So I think maybe Sens fans are looking at how free agency went and how the offseason's gone so far and being like, oh, this is underwhelming. We need a top 4 right shot defenseman. We need a top 6 winger. Well, don't forget about the moves that already happened. I think it's easy to forget about Dylan Cousins, Fabian Zetterlund, and Jordan Spence, especially Fabian Zetterlund didn't really fit in right away, but keep in mind, he was stuck on that 4th line and kind of bounced around. It was kind of crazy for him coming here. So he didn't really find his footing. I think it's going to be much better this time around. And I don't know that there's that much more that needs to be done for the Ottawa Senators now. And this transitions and teases to our next segment, but the question of will Nick Jensen be on LTIR or not, that changes the entire dynamic of what this team can do cap-wise.
Believe it or not, Nick Jensen was 3rd among Senators defensemen in points last year. Everybody talked about the two-way, the shutdown ability, but behind Jake Sanderson and Thomas Chabot, Nick Jensen's 21 points was 3rd on the D core. So, do they need to add more offense? Is Erik Karlsson the answer? Of course, there would have to be money retained on Pittsburgh's part. So let's discuss, because we're on different sides of this debate. Then we'll wrap up the show discussing what Ottawa's remaining needs are in the organization. That's next. You're listening to Locked On Senators, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, let's be honest, it's easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money, it's not just a budgeting app, guys. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So stop just managing your money. Start building that wealth. Instead of juggling multiple different apps, just use Monarch Money so you can check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals all in one place. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all that stress. So what are you waiting for? Take control of your finances now with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year.
All right, Pillsy, just to wrap up my final point there about the core needing to be a step higher in terms of elevating this team from a playoff team, first wild card, into a contender. And I'm looking through the point totals from last year, Pillsy, and if I just run through it, hit me with an over-under expectations for next season versus the amount of points that they had this past year. Tim Stützle, 79 points.
Over, smashing that over.
Agreed. Drake Batherson, 68.
Ooh.
I was going to say that's expectation.
Yeah, I think it's close, but I would hit the under. I think he's going to be in the low 60s.
60 to 70, that's perfectly reasonable, especially for his cap hit.
Yep.
Sanderson, 57 points. I think he has a 70-point year in him.
Okay.
If you go from 4 Nations on, he was on like an 80-point pace.
Yeah. I'll say over, but not 70.
Brady Tkachuk, 55 points.
Over.
Agreed. Shane Pinto, 37 points.
I think that's probably going to be similar, Ross, because I don't, and here
Disagree.
he's not going to get power play time.
But I heavily disagree with that. Don't you remember the start of the year when he was battling injuries? He had like 2 points. Well, he had 3 points in his first 5 games. But if you extend that in his first 20 games, he had, 3 points.
I'll hit the over, but I'm not like, where are you expecting him to get to point-wise?
50. 50 is my goal for Shane Pinto.
Okay, I'll say low 40s. So we're not that far off.
He was way over on the pace. Of course, when you go 17 straight games without a point, that will happen. Ridley Gregg, 34 points.
I think it's going to be right around the same amount. So I'm not going to argue either way.
I'll say slightly over, but that's reasonable for him.
Yeah.
David Perron, 16 points last year.
All right, let's hit the over on that one.
Let's please hit the over on that one. Of course, he only played 43 games and was dealing with a lot, especially early on the season. He was great at the end of the year, too, down the stretch. Dylan Cousins was at 16 points with Ottawa, but I believe he finished somewhere in the 40s overall. I need that to be over.
Yep, smashing that over, Ross.
I think that, and Fabian Zetterlund, 2 goals and 5 points last year.
But what was his season totals? Let's go with
season totals, I believe, was 17 goals, and then he had...
I think 19.
19 goals? Okay, I'll tell you right now. Last year, he had 84 games played, so keep that in mind. He got a little 2 extra. He was getting a head start on the new CBA. It's expected to start next year.
Oh boy.
19 goals and 41 points.
Yeah, I think he is in the 50s.
I agree, and I think he hits 25 goals. So if those players all do that, team's going to be better than they were last year, and they were still a playoff team.
Yep.
And then I also saw a stat. I wish I could give a shout out too, but on Twitter at Sens Central, we had a note yesterday. Linus Ullmark and Levi Merilainen. So if you just take those 2 goalies, which we expect to be the tandem next year, they had the 5th best winning percentage in the National Hockey League last year.
Yeah. I mean, when you take Levy's numbers, which I don't think he could replicate, but that was pretty good. And then when Linus was on his game, he was the Vezina winning goalie that we expected.
Yeah, that's where we're going to see things develop. Pilsy, developments in the offseason, they happen in the organization, they happen within the players, and they happen within my brain as well.
Whoa.
And it feels like I always have a very calm, cool, collected concept of what the Ottawa Senators need to do. Mm-hmm. And then feels like an annual tradition. When the dust settles, I look at the roster and I say, you know what would look really good? Erik Karlsson. And maybe it was the Sens putting his jersey on the 2D logo in the draft room. Seeing that just brought me to a place where Erik Karlsson is a contributing member to the 2025-26 Ottawa Senators. Of course, the $10 million cap hit that he currently has with the Pittsburgh Penguins after having some money, I believe $1.5 million retained by the San Jose Sharks in that initial trade. I think if they can get that down to a $6.5 million cap hit, and of course, the caveat being that Nick Jensen is unavailable and on the LTIR, they need to make that deal happen.
Nostalgia is one hell of a drug, and nostalgia is one of my favorite emotions. So I understand the feeling, Ross. I'd like to start this debate, because Ross and I are on 2 different sides of this, saying I would love to see Erik Karlsson back as an Ottawa Senator. However, I don't think now is the time. I have a feeling that you and other Sens fans think you can just slap a Locked On NHL promo code and send that over to Dubas and you get 50% off your first year for 2 years. Doesn't work that way. I think people are underestimating the value of retained salary, especially, I know you mentioned 2.5, 25%, but especially at the 50%, $5 million.
Just to be clear, I mentioned 6.5 on the show. I put 25% on Twitter this morning, which would be $7.5 million cap hit.
Yes.
Math guy.
Yes. Nice. Good catch there. I want you to continue your case, Ross, and then I have a quick rebuttal because I think there's one major flaw in your line of thinking. So you have the floor, Mr. Levitan. I'll hang up and listen.
Okay, well, I'd like the jury to just know that you all look great today. You guys clearly got a lot of sleep. You look rested. You're having a great day. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind. No, but in all seriousness, this Ottawa Senators team, they need offense. They were 30th in 5-on-5 scoring last year. Yeah, it jumped up to all the way to 23 after the trade deadline, but clearly they need to find more offense. You look at the back end as a way to get the puck into the speed of Tim Stützle in particular, Dylan Cousins in transition, Shane Pinto's a fast player, so you've got speed down the middle. You need defensemen that can move the puck on both sides. It feels like we're living a Freaky Friday from back in the day where it was the right side that was the puck movers and the left side was all locked down when they had Mathot and Phaneuf and Borowiecki. It was the left side lock of Guy Boucher. But all the offense on the back end for Ottawa comes from that left side. And I think it would be very important and a big benefactor to break forechecks if they don't know what side the play is coming out of. So I went and I did a little addition. Math guy here. Last year, the Ottawa Senators' right side of their decor combined for less points than Erik Karlsson had individually. That's Jensen, Zub, Hamonic, and I'm throwing JBD in there too. You know what? Throw Dennis Gilbert in there as well, and his 0 points. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that it can make sense with the money. But for a style of player that Erik Karlsson is, at this point in his career, I would just like to close this argument by saying he would add offensively, clearly. And he is not washed for those saying he's washed. In the last 3 seasons, 2 defensemen in the NHL have more points than Erik Karlsson. Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. And if you just want to say, oh, you're counting his 100-point season. Well, yeah, he earned it. He got his 3rd Norris Trophy. But in the last 2 years, he has 110 points. No defenseman on the Ottawa Senators has even close to that. Jake Sanderson, I think, is close to 95. He would immediately be the number 1 offensive defenseman. You would take pressure off of Sanderson to be the guy on the power play as well when he's playing in all situations. I think if you can make it work in the dynamic of Erik Karlsson coming back, knowing that he's not the captain, not the guy necessarily, and I think he will. I think we heard from someone close to Erik Karlsson that he thinks, nothing confirmed, but thinks Erik Karlsson would 99% welcome a trade back to Ottawa. If a 3-time Norris Trophy winner wants to come to your organization, you have to think long and hard about how that makes sense.
I would like to say, first off, I don't disagree with anything you just said there.
Okay, so sign him. Let's get him in Ottawa.
And I will have my rebuttal after this break.
All right, you listen to Locked On Senators, your team every day. All right, Millsy. So, what you didn't understand there was that I come out of break. So even though you're ready for your rebuttal, what if I'm not ready to give it to you, eh? Final thing, Erik Karlsson, Daniel Alfredsson, still great buddies. They were out golfing in Cabot last month together. Call me nostalgic, call me crazy, but if there's anyone that can put a complete lid on any thoughts that there would be a problem with the dynamic of bringing in Erik Karlsson, it's having one of his best friends and mentors with him every single day in the locker room.
Another great point.
Thank you.
I want this to be clear because, Ross, I feel like you, not on purpose, And sometimes Sens fans paint me as this pessimistic guy that's no fun, and I always rain on parades, and I always have to come in being realistic, and it's boring, and I'm just the responsible parent that's just a drag all the time. So I don't want that to be the narrative here. You made great points. All of which I agree with, especially the dynamic was part of it. But having Alfie here, that does help. So great extra final closing statement. So you would say with your argument that Erik Karlsson is pretty good defenseman then, right? That's fair to say. That's what you're proving there.
Yeah, as long as Kyle Dubas wasn't listening to this, because if he was, I'd just point out that he's a very, very poor defender, especially at this point in his career.
Yeah, but from what we're not talking about that. Just generally, he provides offense. He's not washed, like you said, 3-time Norris winner.
Yep. Should have been 4.
That was the Doughty year.
Yep.
Can still put up points. The injury, not a problem. He played all 82 games last year.
And the year before.
Yep. So
and the year before.
What I'm hearing here, Ross, is there's a lot of value to Erik Karlsson. Agree or disagree?
I completely agree, which is perfect that he's in the situation with the only team in the league, according to Elliot Friedman, that is actively trying to get worse.
Mm-hmm. So if the Pittsburgh Penguins see that they have a defenseman with a lot of value, with all the pros and positives that you stated, and they are one of the teams that are actively trying to get worse, the cost to acquire Erik Karlsson, let's leave retention out of this for now, because that's a sticking point for sure that we have to get to. Just the cost and value of Erik Karlsson alone should be fairly high. We're talking about picks and prospects. That's what the Pittsburgh Penguins would want, correct?
Yep.
What is two things the Ottawa Senators do not have a lot of value in? I'll answer it for you. Picks and prospects. So to start an Erik Karlsson deal conversation, what picks and what prospects do you start with? And I tweeted out what are realistic mock trades. And thank you. I believe everyone did give me realistic. We had a couple lame ones and people trying to be funny. But for the most part, I do think people were being genuine.
Classic Pills. He doesn't want people to be funny.
Well, I specifically asked in that tweet, I don't want people to be funny. I wanted realistic, pragmatic Pillsy here.
Yeah.
I didn't see anyone, well, maybe a couple, but most people did not have the piece of the deal I believe needs to be the starting point of this conversation.
And you believe that's what, a top 10 protected first round pick? Because that's what San Jose's main piece was. And I know that it was a longer contract and they only got 1.5 million retained. But if we're going back, and it was a 3-team trade where Montreal came in there and added a few things, it was the Penguins gave up a first round pick in 2024, top 10 protected, a second round pick in 2025, Jeff Petrie at 25% retained, Casey DeSmith, and Mikael Granlund.
Yeah.
And Jan Ruta.
I believe the starting point would be a first round pick. To not have a first round pick in there for a guy that provides everything that you mentioned, Ross.
Yep.
I think it is crazy. And almost no one in their mock trades had a first round pick as a starting point. So I think you have to start with the first round pick. You probably have to put a good prospect in there. So Blake Montgomery, probably the guy I'm looking at here. I think that makes sense. And then there's probably some sort of NHL roster player or some sort of money that you would have to move along with it. What that would be, I'm not sure. But the issue, and that's like, then we got to talk about retaining salary. 50% retained, $5 million retained is a lot. That's a lot of value. The deal you mentioned, Ross, was 1.5 million retention.
But he was also coming off a Norris Trophy winning season and had term on his contract. So that was $1.5 million over 5 years. So it was...
Which is still less than $10 million cap.
Correct. But they're not actually, so they're holding on to that cap. But because Erik Karlsson's on a backdiving contract, it wouldn't actually cost Pittsburgh that much. 50% retained would be $5.5 million. So it'd be pretty much the same.
But the cap would still be at that amount. It doesn't change the cap.
But is Pittsburgh worried about being a cap team for the next 2 years?
No, but that is value. There is value there.
Right. The Pittsburgh Penguins have $15.8 million in cap space right now.
Yeah, they're not worried about it, but you have to attach a value to them doing that.
Sure.
So basically what I'm saying is using value to get Erik Karlsson right now, for me, is not the play. I would love to see, when this contract is over, Erik Karlsson sign with the Ottawa Senators and retire with the Ottawa Senators. I would love to see it, okay? We can have ice cream after you're done your chores, is what I'm saying as the parent.
Don't say retire. Come to Ottawa and win a Stanley Cup. He's not coming here to sign a 1-day contract and put on the jersey and drop the puck like Danny Heatley and Jason Spezza did at that.
I wasn't suggesting that.
Well, you said come here and retire here. Come here and win a cup here. I want him while he's still got it.
Sure. Come here, win a cup, and retire.
Okay. Or two.
Sure. But you cannot be sending away the value that Pittsburgh would want for Erik Karlsson to get him now, because the things that Pittsburgh wants are the things that the Sens don't need, and the little that they do have of pits and prospects, in my mind, they cannot afford to give up for a defenseman in their late 30s that might just sign here as a free agent in 2 years anyways. So that's the sticking point for me, Ross, is it's just not the time to be shedding those valuable assets for Erik Karlsson right now, when I think he would like to be in Ottawa. As far as I know, he's still got his house here. His wife's from here. He still has, it seems like, a social circle in Ottawa.
Spends his summers in Ottawa.
Spends his summers here. Like, I think he would willingly sign here if that was the option. So I just don't think it's responsible to use the assets that the Ottawa Senators have so little of to acquire Erik Karlsson. That is my argument.
That's fair. We'll revisit this next offseason as well when the cap goes up.
Well, of course.
And the Senators
every offseason. Has there been an offseason where we haven't tried to get Erik Karlsson back to the Ottawa Senators?
But I think you can admit that it makes the most sense now. Again, this whole conversation hinges on Nick Jensen's $4 million being on LTIR and the Senators having one less NHL right shot defenseman. But if that's the case, and clearly if Ottawa was going that hard at Rasmus Andersson, they end up getting Jordan Spence. Who knows whether they've still called on Rasmus Andersson after, but Martian did say that the organization would still like to add a right shot defenseman, which kind of gives you the pause of what they feel is the situation with Nick Jensen. 36 years old, by the way, coming back from a hip issue, and skating is one of your best assets of your game. I think that now would make the most sense. I do admit that in the past, I've probably had the nostalgia goggles on, but I think that when you look at the lack of offense, Ottawa, I've actually got it up here. The Senators were 18th in the National Hockey League in points by defenseman last year, bottom half of the league. He would be a direct injection of what they need right now, both positionally and strategically, that would help get the team to the next level.
Yep, and I haven't disagreed with a single one of your points portraying your arguments there, Ross.
So it's all value.
If he was a free agent, different story. Now we're talking. Now we can get into that. But that's not the case. It's all about the value. And if Pittsburgh was looking for roster players, like if you could include a Jensen, a Perron, and things like that to acquire him
as a former Penguin,
as the main value pieces, different story. But where I can't follow along with your plan is giving up the value that they would have to give up to get him, because I don't believe people that are like a third and Tyler Boucher or like talking about third round picks is not going to get it done for Erik Karlsson. And people that think that, I think, are way off.
So let me then wrap this conversation with your thoughts on my trade proposal for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And let's keep in mind here as well that the Penguins already have 3 second-round picks and 2 third-round picks in next year's draft. They have 2 second-round picks, 3 third-round picks, and 2 fourth-round picks in the 2027 draft. So they're already accumulating draft picks here, moving forward in their retooling around Sidney Crosby, which is a story for another day, that Crosby will not take more money, will not leave. He is as legacy-driven as any player that I think we can remember that's played in the National Hockey League, especially for that type of superstar.
Yeah, they're going to have to bury Crosby in a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey, and it's going to have to be on
like he might own
August
the team like Mario.
7th.
Mario's
So
probably
that's
the last guy that's shown that type of loyalty to an organization. So he obviously learned from him.
And he got percentage of ownership as well. Well, he didn't get it. He acquired the percentage of ownership.
Well, speaking of acquiring Erik Karlsson, the thought that I would have, and let's keep in mind that Trent Mann is with the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, so he knows the Senators prospect pool more or less better than most people there. He also pushed for Tyler Boucher at 10th overall. Do I think Tyler Boucher has a lot of value? No. But do I think a fresh start and Pittsburgh being a spot that has opportunity for him? Yeah, I do think that makes a lot of sense. So my offer would start with Buffalo's second-round pick, which I think probably has the value of a late first in a deep draft. Sorry, Buffalo. Blake Montgomery, which pains me to put in because we're big Blake guys, elite athlete, great dude. We'd love to have him as a future Ottawa Senator. I think we both see him as a bottom 6 NHLer that can give you 100 to 200 at least NHL games and be a full-time NHLer. So there's value in that. And he's coming off a great year. His value is higher than it definitely was last year before making the switch to the London Knights. So my offer would be Buffalo's second-round pick, Blake Montgomery, Tyler Boucher, and then Tomas Hamara as a depth defenseman. And we know Kyle Dubas isn't afraid of undersized defensemen. He's still 6 feet, so maybe just undersized for the Senators prospect pool. But I think as a former third-round pick who's had a couple of years of development, who's turning pro now, it fits more hey, he's going to be in your professional organization this year, and he's going to hopefully be an NHL defenseman one day. So you get a defenseman, 2 forwards, and a second-round pick. That's probably as far as I'd be willing to go. And again, that would need 25% salary retention and no bodies off the NHL roster for Ottawa, which would mean Nick Jensen would be on the LTIR for this to happen. It would leave the Senators with about $900,000 in cap space.
$900,000 in cap space is cutting it a little close for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would like to have the retention a little bit closer to 35% or whatever gets you to $6.5 million. That would leave Ottawa with $1.9 million in cap space.
Yeah, that's a little better. I think the conversation starts with the first round pick. I know the Buffalo second is basically that. And that's
but how about this then? Because right now Ottawa doesn't have their first round pick next year. So now that like mentally we've decided that Ottawa doesn't have first, if that gets reinstated, give them that.
Yeah,
you already think you don't have it.
Yeah, I don't think Dubas would hold a lot of value in that clause.
And don't forget, Kyle Dubas is a Sens fan, so maybe he just wants to see the nostalgia that we want to see. Hey, throw Spets in the trade. We'll take him in the front office.
Yeah, and give Dubas season tickets. So
yeah, exactly. Or some memorabilia. Some signed autograph.
Yeah, a signed Ottawa Senators Erik Karlsson jersey. The new 2D logo, though. And we'll give him an alternate jersey, too.
I'll sign this for him.
Unfortunately, I think it starts with the first. The Buffalo second is close, but not enough. Okay. I think Blake Montgomery, Boucher, those are guys they would have value with. So I don't think you're too far off there, Ross, but I don't think you're quite there personally. My quick rebuttal argument was going to be I think you're in a situation where you want your cake and you want to eat it too. You want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to say Erik Karlsson's a good player, but you don't want to give up the value that it costs to acquire a good player. So I think that's where things are tough. But we'll see. I mean, doing mock trades I don't think a single person has ever got anywhere close to correct on a mock trade. It's
you're saying we didn't nail the original Erik Karlsson trade for 9 assets?
Yeah, I mean, how did they not include Hurdle, Pavelski, and Timo Meyer in that deal coming back? Those are the guys we were talking about.
Yeah. I need to see Erik Karlsson play at least one game with Tim Stützle. That's my final statement.
And when he signs as a free agent, I think you will get your wish.
Fun fact, Brady Tkachuk and Erik Karlsson were teammates for 3 months, technically.
Yes. Yeah.
Or 1 day, if you include the golf tournament, which is the most awkward day in Sens history.
The time is nigh.
Jeez Louise. Good debate. Let us know in the comments what you think. It's something where, as much as you want it to happen, I can understand, Pilsy, the thought process behind not wanting to give up assets and maybe just biding your time. Hey, maybe at the Olympics, Erik Karlsson will discuss with Linus Ullmark what it's like being a Senator now versus then. A little play on Mitch Marner apparently discussing with the Vegas Golden Knights players at the Four Nations 6 months before leaving the Toronto Maple Leafs what it would be like to live in Vegas. I mean, if you're waiting for the NHL schedule release, as much as we're looking at the Sens home opener, I think every hockey fan is looking for when Vegas plays in Toronto for the first time.
And the reverse, when Toronto plays in Vegas.
Yeah, but I mean, Mitch Marner's return to Toronto is going to be...
The Boo Birds are going to be out. Maybe the library might be loud, actually.
What are tickets for that game going to go for?
Mitch Marner's contract?
Yeah,
price?
Too much is the correct answer. Pilsy, wrapping up today's show, what are Ottawa's remaining needs? And we should say, speaking of Vegas, happy trails to Jeremy Davies, a good foot soldier in Belleville, actually led the Belleville Sens in scoring by defensemen last year, was an AHL All-Star. He signed a 2-year deal in Vegas, and nowhere does it qualify whether it's a 1 or a 2-way contract. Usually when it's a 2-way, it's specifically mentioned. So I find that interesting. And if they're throwing a 1-way deal on 2 years for Cole Reinhardt, who knows? Who knows? But Jeremy Davies is off to Vegas, which means the left side of the Belleville Senators decor is as young as I think I've ever seen in the organization. Now, when they sign restricted free agent Donovan Sabrango, you'll have your number 1 guy, wore a letter last year, played NHL games. That's a nice piece to have in Belleville. But beyond that, it's Jory and Donovan, it's Tomas Hamara until he gets traded for Erik Karlsson, and it's Matthew Andonovski on the left side. So with that thought process, is a left shot defenseman to replace Jeremy Davies at the top of your wish list for the rest of the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I would still say the top of my wish list would be a top 6 scoring winger, but I don't know how you get that done, or another NHL caliber right shot defenseman, depending on the health of Nick Jensen. But if we're talking about with the information we have right now and being realistic and responsible with our cap space, then yeah, I think you want to, honestly, I wish they just brought Jeremy Davies back like that. Like, you lost Jeremy Davies and now you need a Jeremy Davies, in my opinion. Because that left side of the Belleville Senators decor is extremely young. None of them can rent cars, I think, as of right now.
I think a lot of the conversation, though, with Belleville is 1-year deals. I know they gave 2 to Hayden Hodgson, but maybe that was the sticking point, knowing how young the decor is down there, that maybe they're just like, hey, let's work on 1-year deals and go from there. I'm just going to throw out a name for the left shot defenseman. I know you're going to say, oh, nostalgia, but Christian Wolanin had an unreal year with Abbotsford and won the Calder Cup. I would love to have him back. He was a great soldier down there, and he could be a guy where if there's an injury, knock on wood, there isn't, to the left side of the decor, you now have an option, whether it's Sabrango or Wolanin, because it feels like right now you're either bringing up a complete rookie who's never played an NHL game or Sabrango. So
who has 2 NHL games to his name.
Exactly. So I do think that if you are bringing a left shot defenseman, it has to be a legit call-up option if you need him. Because on the right side, you've got the extra in Martin Palo, and sure, he can play both sides. But I would like to see an NHL caliber AHL defenseman play on that left side in Belleville. Because the right side, you've got call-up options, right? Lassie Thompson, Max Gannett, both guys, and even Carter Yakimchuk, if he's earned it, could come up. So I think I would like to see maybe another right shot defenseman in Belleville, but Jabril Toure, I think, has earned the right to be a full-time AHLer after splitting the year last year between the NHL and AHL. So I'm going to say that what's left to do is a left shot defenseman call-up option in Belleville and at least 2 more centermen for the Belleville Senators, because right now it's Stephen Halliday.
Left shot centerman.
Sure. Yeah. Stephen Halliday, Jan Yannick, who's still a restricted free agent, but we assume that'll get done. Clearly wants a deal. He posted, I think, 3 different Senator signings yesterday. I was like, let's go. Awesome. Love that. I think it was for, for a few of the boys down there. So Jan Yannick seems like an awesome dude too. But Oscar Pettersson played a lot of center last year, potentially a centerman there. But even so, that would be Halliday, Yannick, Pettersson down the middle. I still think you need a legit second line center for Belleville to be a threat. And then you got to get some depth down the middle because they've got a ton of wingers. And maybe that's a situation where, like last offseason, the Yarventi for Chasson and Bourgault trade, maybe you're looking at something trade-wise where it's a minor league AHL trade. The Sens have so many right wingers in Belleville. Kaliev, Pilon, McEwen we expect, even though it's a one-way deal. Bourgault, who we expect to sign RFA. Tyler Boucher and Jake Chasson are all right shot. Well, Kaliev left shot, but always plays right wing. Those guys are all on the right side. So I'd like to see some left wing and center depth down in Belleville. The Senators, as we mentioned, still have a lot of flexibility. Even if all their RFAs are signed, they still have 6 contract slots available to them after all their moves yesterday.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's the right track for what we're looking for here. And depending on how free agency goes, I mean, Nikolai Ehlers holds all the cards right now, so I don't blame him for being patient because he can just keep having that price drive up and drive up. He's really the only player of his caliber available. But yeah, I'd like the Sens to take a look at the bargain bin for possible NHLers later on in the offseason. But apart from trades, I don't think we're going to see anything big happen here, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens next. We'll get you some stories from Dev Camp tomorrow, and Sebastian Hyde, the host of Locked On NHL Prospects. You saw him on our mock draft, and he is going to join us later on this week, in other words, tomorrow, to discuss the 2025 draft class and the Senators prospect pool. And he is the USHL scout for elite prospects as well. And the Senators drafted 2 players in Blake Vanek and in Bruto Egan, who played in the USHL last year. So we'll get his takes on that. Looking forward to that conversation. Again, let us know in the comments your thoughts on our conversation about Erik Karlsson, because I do find it so extremely fascinating. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and engaging with the show. You can find us on social media at Sens Central on Twitter, LockedOn.Senators on Instagram. The show's free and available everywhere you get podcasts, including on YouTube. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.